discussing a paper, hyperattention. It's approximate attention as a solution to the long context window problem. What is the long context window problem? In large language models, we have the desire to put longer prompts, let's say 40-minute prompts, 1-hour prompts, videos, movies, and then query them, do inference on very, very long prompts. Now, this requires a massive amount of compute, and that's why hyperattention is a potential solution, or approximate attention could be a potential solution to the problem. Now, in terms of what the compute is actually required and why it's so massive, it has to do with the matrix multiplication, which goes into the attention architecture. And if you have, let's say, I don't know, let's say 100,000 tokens of a context window, then that scales up to, if that scales quadratically, then you have 100,000 times 100,000, and that's, you know, whatever that is. And then let's say you have 1 million, that's 1 million times 1 million. So you can see how quadratic scaling can become a massive problem pretty quickly. Why is it called approximate attention? Well, it's approximate because what you're doing is literally an approximation. And the solution, it's approximation, it's quantization, it's finding the best and most efficient way to sample through that long context window. This is the answer. So it's a statistical solution to an engineering problem. This is a Not Even Wrong podcast. It's March 5th, 2024. This is Krim Delko. It's the second installment of today. For the year, we are down 16%. The market is down up 5.8. We're underperforming by 21.8%. Before I go into the discussion, real quick about the markets, the sell-off in Tesla continues today. We had a sell-off in the market in general. I think it's relatively broad in the tech sector. The big tech companies are down, not all of them. I think Tesla specific has some continued negative news related the expectations of Q1 deliveries. I think that's now sinking in that we will have low numbers. If we look at the numbers that are available, for example, China is trailing about 8 to 9% up year over year. Europe is probably up about 10%, and the US is probably up about the same. So we're going to have maybe about 10% growth, which is slightly below what the market is expecting. The market is expecting more like high teens growth year over year. And I think that's where we live right now, and that's where the stock is. So we're obviously not happy about it, but I think we can kind of connect the dots, and this is the most important thing as an investor. As long as you know where you stand and what the situation is and why your assets are moving the way they're moving, I think you're in good shape. You can still make decisions about buying and selling, but most importantly, you need to understand what's going on. Now let's get to the conversation. So long context window, I think with the launch of Gemini, this has been a big discussion in the community, because Gemini, now I'm a bit confused about what these models are, and I believe Gemini is just a family of multimodal models with different context horizons. And what is a context horizon? It just means that you have a model which is trained on masked autoencoders, and which I think we've discussed at length. Think of it like a gigantic multidimensional matrix of data distributions that belong together. So it's a sorting of data, let's say words, for example, sorting of words together in a multi-dimensional feature matrix. So we have the words "I walk on the beach," which are part of a distribution that has to do with happiness. It has to do with holidays. It has to do with romance. It is certainly far away from words like horror, death, sadness. So we're trying to position words relative to each other and then sort them in a matrix of distributions. Now this is multi-dimensional, so that's why maybe this example might seem pretty obvious, but think of this like if you really have a many n-time multi-dimensional matrix of these types of distributions. And this is really what transformer architecture kind of has done to the world of AI. It has enabled us to quickly, to train models. Let's just talk about large language models now. So we have large language models which are trained like this. And now the question is, okay, can we query this model? Can we do inference on prompts such as, give me a scenario where I walk on the beach with my girlfriend, and that's a scenario where the event horizon, the context horizon is relatively short, and the model can infer something useful. But what if my inference, what if my prompt is 45 minutes long video? What if it's a whole code base of thousands of lines of code? We want to have the whole context because it's important in the video as well as in the code. And if we do that, we have a problem of computational budget because the way these models are constructed, and this is a detailed discussion in the paper, where they talk about the actual attention mechanism, the math in there, which is you have 3 matrix multiplications. You have the query and the key, and then the value, and those are 3 matrices that are multiplied with each other in certain ways, with transpose and things like that. It doesn't matter exactly how it's done. That's why I'm saying it's a statistical solution to an engineering problem, because the engineering problem is that you have these matrix multiplications which just exponentially increase the amount of compute and memory. And the problem is, if we have this amount of compute and memory and a lot of I/O, we have a power problem, we have a heat problem, we have a memory wall problem. That's the engineering side of things. And the solution is statistical in a sense that maybe we can quantize shortcuts where, for example, if you have a diagonal of a matrix that you can construct in a certain way, where you only capture the really essential cells of the matrix instead of all the values of the matrix. So that's fundamentally what's going on here. This is similar to flash attention, and the flash attention paper gets pretty prominent citing in this paper. The reason flash attention has caught my attention is the same reason. Chris Ray spoke about this at NeurIPS. It's a solution, it's an engineering problem that has statistical and engineering type solutions to it. And it starts with, with approximation. Just very simply, if you have a big matrix, maybe you can reduce this matrix to less data, but not lose too much information. This also scratches the surface of PPO and DPO because it's a similar problem, right? How can we have let's say an M by M matrix where N and M are large numbers, and maybe we can reduce the volume of this matrix without losing too much information. How do we do that? Well, how about we look at sampling? How about we can do it randomly, right? We can just sample. If the distribution of values in this matrix is completely dispersed, so we have perfect dispersion, then that means we have full, maximum entropy, and that means that there's not much we can do. In that case, this could be, for example, the fauna of the Amazon jungle, and now we want to put this in a sort of long context window to infer which flower to pick. Well, it's going to be difficult. The same way it's very difficult to do that as a human when you walk in the Amazon jungle. So what you could do in this case, instead of doing all this math, you could say, well, since we have maximum entropy, it doesn't really matter what we do, because not each piece of information has the same value, so we might as well just pick any flower randomly. And the chances that we pick the right flower for the right problem to be solved is relatively high. But if we have very little entropy, in other words, we have a lot of information in this matrix which says, look, there is this one type of snake that you need to avoid, and the key times query multiplication will give me very high values for black mamba in the context of what to avoid, then maybe I can have a 45-minute clip of somebody walking through the Amazon and still answer this particular question, because the prompt, which snake is to be avoided, will get very, very high values in terms of black mamba, which will get very high values in the matrix multiplication that is relevant for this particular prompt. So in a sense, we can approach this problem as a, how about we reduce the very large context window. We keep it large, but we reduce the data. Okay, the amount of data that needs to be processed can be reduced, because fundamentally we don't need all the other stuff. We only have to focus on what's relevant for our particular prompt. So this is a very high-level discussion. Imagine you have a movie, a 2-hour movie about, and all you see is ocean all the time, and then at some point there is a boat that passes through, and that's the whole movie. What you want to catch is that particular boat, because the rest of the movie, you don't need to process all these tokens, because they're all the same. And there is a way to a priori capture this through approximation, sampling, stochastic, variational inference. All of these techniques can be used to approximate the information value of a matrix and then act accordingly. That's the key idea here. Again, it's quantization, and also, of course, some of the typical stuff that is being used on the hardware side of things, so quantization, reduced precision, can be also applied to the problem of long context windows, because what we're trying to do is reduce the amount of compute and the amount of data that has to be stored in memory, which is actually a lot more of a bottleneck. So if we can quantize the thing, quantize just means we put everything that's unnecessary to zero and only keep the thing which is necessary, and then process that, and then we can do this with a lot less memory. So to summarize, approximate attention is literally an approximation of the values of the attention matrix, which is key times query. Let's see which values matter, and then process the rest of the attention architecture in a sense that we only look at what's relevant. That way we can increase the context window without increasing the computational budget, and more importantly also without increasing the memory and I/O budget, which are more of a constraint when it comes to mask autoencoder and transformer architecture. This is a very nice example of I would say, an elegant statistical solution for a massive engineering problem. Now, of course, we've spoken about Thierry Tombe and people, Mark Horowitz and some of the people in the electrical engineering department of Stanford and other places around the world that are trying to solve this same problem with a real engineering problem. So we can, maybe design better hardware. We can design better chips. We can have dedicated large language model type chips. But regardless of all these options, I think these statistical methods are obviously a lot more interesting because they solve the problem sort of in virtual space. So you don't have to actually change the silicon, change the power consumption. You can just have statistical methods to infer the information content of a model and the query, and then act accordingly in the sense that do a long horizon window with these statistical tools. Most importantly, this can be done in both ways. If your prompt has a lot of information, in other words, it's the Mamba example where you have a 1-hour prompt where there is, or take, the ocean example, right? The ocean. So there is an ocean and there's a boat that shows up in, for about 20 seconds, and the rest of the movie is just ocean. That's a lot of information, very little entropy. That's you can use this technique and process the whole context window because you have this piece of information that is relevant. In the other side, let's say we have a 1 hour movie that goes through the Amazon jungle and there's all this type of information. And we query, for example, okay, pick a beautiful flower. Well, there's so many, you can stochastically just say, okay, we don't have to process the whole thing. We can just sample something and process from there. So in both cases, in both extremes, very high entropy and very low entropy, we can use these techniques. Thank you.